All right, again, welcome everyone. My name is Calandra Waters-Lake. I'm Executive Director of Wild Virginia, and I'm really glad you all are able to join us for this webinar on red-cockaded woodpeckers. Before we get to our main presentation, I just wanted to remind you all of some things that you are probably aware of. Some of you might be joining us for the first time. A number of you have been to our webinars in the past. So a little reminder that Wild Virginia's mission is to protect and connect Virginia's wild places. And we do that through focusing on habitat connectivity, water quality, and educational opportunities like the one you are attending right now. And if you love what we do, please consider donating to Wild Virginia. There's a QR code on the screen that will take you to our donation site. You can also go to our website, wildvirginia.org, to learn more about what we do and make a contribution. I know you're here to meet our new team member and hear more about woodpeckers, but just a little shout out for our upcoming webinar, which will be on Virginia osprey. That is going to take place on November 13th, also at 6:30 p.m. And it'll be with Dr. Brian Watts of the Center for Conservation Biology, who's at the College of William and Mary. So if you have not had a chance to sign up for that webinar yet, I hope that you will do so. All right, so this evening it is my pleasure to introduce the newest member of our team, Trapper Fowler. He's our Habitat Connectivity Program Director, and he's going to be telling you more about woodpeckers today. But before he does that, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Trapper. So he brings to us 15 years of experience in natural resource management. He's worked with the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, also the Coastal Conservation League. Trapper is also a certified wildlife biologist, and he has degrees from Colorado State University and Clemson University. So with no further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our new team member, Trapper Fowler. And Trapper, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Awesome. Give me just 1 second here. Everything look good? We'll get going. All right, thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Calandra. I'm super excited to be here. I can't wait to help advance wildlife habitat connectivity and crossings in Virginia. This is a really exciting new chapter for both me and my family. So tonight I'll be speaking about red-cockaded woodpeckers. This is just a general overview of the program topics. So everything from identification to nesting and diet, cooperative breeding, the recovery and the current range, historical range, and of course habitat connectivity. We can't leave that out. So red-cockaded woodpeckers are also called RCWs for short. That's probably how you will hear me refer to them most tonight, to help save some time and to avoid some tongue twisting on my part. Here are a few more terms I'd like you to be familiar with because I'm definitely going to reference them throughout the presentation, and I'll just briefly go over them. So prescribed fire is the controlled, planned, and intentional fire set by professionals under precise, prescriptive weather conditions to achieve a specific goal. So in no way, shape, or form is this a wildfire. Cavities are the actual holes in the pine tree that either the woodpecker roosts in at night or uses as a nest. So just to be clear on that. And then, of course, a cluster is a grouping of those cavity trees. Next up, so number one is actually the red-cockaded woodpecker. And as you can tell, in the top right-hand corner, labeled 1, they sure don't have a whole lot of red, which is a little misleading. You would think with the name they would have more. Of course, the woodpeckers number 2 through 8 on the screen certainly have more red, and don't necessarily have red in their name. And these are more common species that you're probably familiar with. Number 9, that really large woodpecker, is actually the ivory-billed woodpecker. So if you see this one, you've got quite the discovery on your hands. These were to be classified as extinct. From what I understand, that's gotten pushed back a little bit due to some recent research and discovery. But either way, if you see this bird, you've really done something. But you wouldn't see them other than in the swampy habitats of the Southeast. The reason I bring those up, one, they're just an iconic species of something that we've likely lost, or maybe there's just a few individuals, but they're the only 2 woodpecker species listed under the ESA, the Endangered Species Act, that I'm aware of. So for identification, since this bird does not have red, there is a red band on its foot you can see in this picture, but pay close attention to that white cheek patch that's on either side of the face. It's huge. I'm going to show you another picture here shortly that you can even see from a distance. But that really is honestly the most distinguishable trait, the best indicator. And of course, you're not seeing any red. That black and white ladder back. As far as size goes, they're just slightly bigger than a downy woodpecker. Yet in this picture, notice that you do see red feathers. This is on a male. You would never see red feathers on a female, but you can barely see those little red feathers just above that white cheek patch and behind the eye. But you're really only going to see this if that male bird is agitated. And by no means do we want to agitate a endangered species or threatened species at this point. But that's where the bird gets its name. These red-cockaded feathers actually come from a term meaning a ribbon or an ornament worn on a hat. So that's where the common name comes from. That really is the best way to tell apart an adult male versus a female. Otherwise, they're pretty much monomorphic, or both sexes look the same, at least without a bird in hand. But again, you're going to need a spotting scope, maybe a pair of really good binoculars to be able to see this. Young males do actually have a red cap, but they lose that red cap after just a few months. This was once a common bird species across the Southeast. They were actually listed in 1970 under the precursor of the ESA, and then, of course, under the Endangered Species Act of 1973, they received protections. At that time, RCWs range-wide were documented to be fewer than 10,000 individuals in a widely scattered, isolated, and declining populations. Today, conservative estimates are that there are around 7,800 active clusters, so not individuals, but clusters of birds range-wide. Almost double the number of clusters, not individual birds, that existed since 1995. So that they have made a comeback due to recovery efforts. You can see here on this slide that RCWs were downlisted, not delisted, but downlisted from endangered to threatened not too far back in 2024, so very, very recent. Along with this delisting came a name change. I still have a very hard time remembering this because I am so accustomed to the genus Picoides. According to Fish and Wildlife Service, while their status has improved, the species has still not fully recovered. The RCW remains a threatened species at risk of becoming endangered again, primarily due to habitat loss. In Virginia, RCWs are listed as state endangered and Tier 1A on the State Wildlife Action Plan, or the SWAP. Just as a reminder, the one part of 1A means that they face an extremely high risk of extinction or extirpation. Populations of these species are at critically low levels, facing immediate threats, or occur within an extremely limited range. Intense and immediate management action is needed and required. The A part of 1A means that managers have identified on the ground species or habitat management strategies expected to benefit the species, at least some of which can be implemented with existing resources and are expected to have a reasonable chance of improving the species conservation. So just to note, this is the blurry picture I was referencing earlier. This is kind of zoomed out and using, I think, a camera phone to zoom in on this species on a tree. But you can see, even though this is a blurry picture, you can still see that big white cheek patch. So it just showing you how good that is of an indicator and an identifier for this species. Current range of this bird as of today is in purple. So far west is East Texas, south to Florida, and then far north is Virginia. In Virginia today, these green dots, which you can see there's not very many, signify where the bird is today. And of course, used to be, you can see in that bottom image with those dashed lines, the bird almost used to have a statewide presence in Virginia, just about. Note that if you want to see an RCW, a big woods wildlife management area is likely your best opportunity in Virginia, as the other public locations on protected lands don't have public access readily available. So you can't get that close to the clusters. So a good place to go, and I haven't been, but certainly plan to be there at some point. So through the ESA, through the listing, there was a recovery plan. Goals are set and management recommendations are carried out to increase the population. Now, this includes specifically for RCWs, prescribed burning to eliminate the mid-story hardwood vegetation. So this allows the bird to forage effectively. And it also removes the structure for nest predators to be able to get up into the nest. Part of this restoration is restoring longleaf pine on the landscape. So longleaf are longer living pine trees, pine species. They're more fire resistant and they're more susceptible to heart rot fungus, which actually makes the inner wood, the heartwood, softer and makes it easier for the birds to excavate their cavities. So this is the only woodpecker species that excavates their cavities in live pine trees. Another part of the recovery plan is just carefully planning timber harvest in pine forests. So not just longleaf, but other pine species to create these open pine savannas. That's what this bird prefers. Also included is moving birds to repopulate historical locations throughout their range. So translocations, as well as bolstering existing populations when needed. And then, of course, installing artificial nest cavities to promote successful nesting and increasing the number of overall cavities on the landscape for the birds, not just the breeding pair, but also the helper birds. And I'll talk a little bit about more what the helper birds are here shortly. Just below the components, the three components of population dynamics, these are really important to note. And I just want to call out that number one there is all related to maintaining genetic diversity that increases with greater number of potential breeding pairs. Number two, speaking to the need for habitat connectivity. And then number three, calling for the need for intervention as the birds just can't expand to new habitats quick enough on their own. So here's a picture of a RCW chick, just a few days old. Nests are located in the breeding male's roost cavity, which is kind of interesting. Only one adult bird per roost or per cavity. Cavity entrances are often oriented with a west to southwest orientation, and this is attributed to local climate conditions that yield greater reproductive success. So more sunlight, less intense storms coming from that direction. These birds are active only during the daytime, and they return to their roost at night. This is a tiny bird again, and if they're called out in the forest at night, they will definitely get picked off by something bigger and badder. Think an owl. Hatching occurs 10 to 12 days past egg laying. Takes about 3 weeks, give or take, for the young to fledge, so leave the nest. This photo was taken using a peeper camera. What in the world is a peeper camera, you may ask yourself, and how in the world did we get it up so high in the tree, noting that cavities can be 100 feet high in the tree? Well, this next slide's going to show you. So the wireless video screen is held in a backpack on the ground level, and then you use a telescoping pole, that yellow pole you can see in the picture, telescope it up, and it has a little probe on the end that you can actually stick in the nest cavity that has a small camera. So every April into July, wildlife professionals are using this tool to monitor nest success and document sex ratios. These nests are checked every 4 days, sometimes more frequently. I failed to mention, but you can see it really good in this picture on the right, that wood chips, these pretty sizable wood chips, are great indicators even before the eggs are there. It's a good sign that it's an RCW actually making this nest in this nest cavity versus a squirrel, like a flying squirrel, or even another bird species, because they tend to use things like pine straw. So those wood chips are really important to note. And that tells you when to come back and check the nest again. Typically, a female is going to lay 1 to 4 eggs, and I think 2 to 3 is probably the average. So monitoring protocols for some locations call for the chicks to be banded. This would occur between day 5 and 10. Again, knowing when those eggs are initially laid dictates when the banding will occur. And that's why the nest must be monitored really closely and checked often. The bands, or the jewelry that the bird receives, always contains a U.S. Geological Survey aluminum band, in addition to a color combination series of bands. Each unique color combo is collected and written down, and this allows the biologist to correctly identify individual birds later on. And this is essential from studying everything from dispersal to behavior to survival for the species. These birds do mate for life, with only one pair of birds breeding per cluster, so per grouping of roost and nest trees. Nest desertion is likely the most frequent cause of nest failure, and this happens when other species enter the nest cavity. These kleptoparasites, like other woodpecker species, bluebirds, flying squirrels, are notorious, and the RCW will simply abandon the cavity as a result. And this is why often, if you go see a lot of different RCW colonies or clusters, you'll actually see bluebird houses mounted on the ground. So like 3 or 4 feet off the ground. It's to help draw those bluebirds out of the nest cavities or out of the roost cavities, let them use this bluebird box. So pay attention to that. These birds can live 10 to 12 years in the wild on average, but I think there's records of them getting older in captivity. Now I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about habitat and natural history for the species. RCW habitat requirement and management benefits all these other species you can see in this illustration. It's just teeming with life, very biodiverse. The longleaf pine forests, RCW habitat, maintained with frequent prescribed fire on a per unit basis. So let's just say a meter square is just as diverse as a rainforest. So think about that for a minute. Growing up in South Carolina, I was taught a lot about the rainforest and how diverse it was. But not once was I taught about how diverse the longleaf pine forest was, which was essentially in my backyard. Fortunately, I think that's changed today because I know some really good teachers that are doing just that and educating the youth about these places. But all this is easy to see in this illustration by Patrick Elliott, how diverse this habitat really is. I mean, it's entitled Pine Barrens, but there's nothing barren about it. I actually have this illustration hanging in my office. I love it. RCWs do require older and larger trees to roost and nest in, to excavate their cavities in. They certainly want more open and park-like forest habitat with that diverse, grassy, herbaceous understory I just mentioned. RCWs rarely come to the ground for anything. They're thought to even bathe in water-filled depressions on the tree limbs, which is pretty crazy. Just to note, this flower I have here is yet another example, in addition to RCWs, with species overlap between South Carolina, where I'm from, and Virginia. This is a pine barren gentian. It's blooming right now through December. You might even get to see it in January. I just saw these last week in South Carolina, but just brilliant purple and blues. In addition to being a wildlife nut, I also love rare plants, and this is certainly one of them. I bet if you go to Big Woods Wildlife Management Area, you may just see this species in addition to RCWs. So RCW diet is certainly primarily insects, but they also eat some fruits and seeds. But if that mid-story starts to creep up, that vegetation starts to exceed, over head high, 6 to 7 feet, then the birds cannot effectively forage. They will abandon the site. This again is why prescribed fire is crucial. It keeps that understory beat down, early successional, and it actually promotes good herbaceous growth. That's not only good for RCWs, but also important for all these other wildlife species as well. Some sites do use mechanical means to control the mid-story, but this certainly does not create the vegetation, the diversity that prescribed fire does. It also doesn't actually remove it. It just kind of knocks it down on the forest floor and suppresses a lot of good vegetation. It doesn't incorporate it back into the soil quite like fire does. It's also way more expensive and doesn't last as long. So most woodpeckers utilize snags or dead trees for their cavity, for the roosting and nesting. RCWs are unique in that they do use live pines. The diameter of cavities are about 3 inches. If you see one that's larger in a live pine, it's likely been widened out or blown out by another species or another animal, another taxa. There's over 27 other species known to utilize RCW cavities, sometimes while they're still in there, which is not preferred, but certainly after they have used it and moved on to another site. Anything from other woodpecker species, bluebirds, let's see, chickadees, titmice. If it gets big enough, something like a pileated slips in there and widens it out. I mean, you could even see owls and wood ducks and even raccoons move in, and they do. And this is why this species is considered to be a keystone species, in that their habitat, their cavity is used by all these other species. This includes reptiles and amphibians and insects. Longleaf pine are often used by RCWs for their nest cavities, due to that red heart rot fungus that softens the inner wood, like I said, because excavation can take years. So it's a lot of energy for these birds to complete a nest cavity. But they're not necessarily exclusive to longleaf, because you can see them roosting and nesting in other pine species, to include slash pine and loblolly and pond pine, and there's likely other species. Looking at this picture, you can see that resin, that sap, that white yellow candle looking residue just running down the tree. And that's all because the RCWs have went in and created these resin wells that just allow that sap to just flow down the tree. If a nest predator, chicken snakes, rat snakes are notorious for getting into RCW nest, but if they try to climb this tree, they're actually going to get stuck to the tree. So it is a defense mechanism, and it works for more than just snakes. As long as, again, that mid-story is not getting too tall, because then they can just avoid this resin. But even if you went and stuck your hand on one of these trees, you would get stuck. Your hand would get stuck, and then you're going to spend some time and energy trying to wash it off your hand or your clothes. And I'm sure many of you have experienced sap, but this is sap like none other here. Longleaf pine, again, keep on going back to this connection between the bird and this particular pine species. Longleaf actually produce more resin and for longer than other pine species. Again, heavily fire dependent species, both longleaf and red-cockaded woodpeckers. Interesting that RCWs utilize a cooperative breeding strategy. And this is unique among birds. I think there's only like 3% that actually use this strategy. Usually the males from previous generations stick around to help raise the young of the breeding pair. So just picture a lot of crazy uncles sticking around to raise you if you're an RCW chick. So we're talking about incubating the eggs. We're talking about feeding you when you get a little older, defending you, defending the territory, excavating new cavities. Female helpers are certainly less common. It's usually the males, the crazy uncles. And then once a bird is decided to be a helper, they forego breeding unless something happens to the breeding male, and then they can step in. Territories for individuals can range and is dependent on habitat suitability and population density at any given location. Given that this is a threatened species and much of this is related to habitat loss, populations do need to be bolstered. This is where installing artificial nest cavities come into play. So this is a slide that has a lot going on, and I'm going to try to explain it, but these artificial nest boxes actually come prefabricated. A trained and certified biologist, yours truly seen there on the right in the tree, either uses what they call a Swedish ladder or a climbing stand So this is a climbing stand that I was trained and certified on. So if you were hunting, you would actually face the other way, but because I'm installing a nest box, I'm facing the tree. If you've ever been on a climbing stand, this will make sense. But you climb up this tree, depending on how high, the shape of the tree and a lot of other things, a lot of other factors. But you carry up, you climb up there pretty much empty-handed, and then you use ropes to pull things up to you. And you usually have to have somebody on the ground for ground support, helping to clip in with carabiners and stuff like that, all your gear. So you pull up this big, heavy Lowe's bucket, if you will, just chock full of all kind of gear, spray paint and chisels and a hammer and just all kinds of stuff. And then you also carry up a small arborist chainsaw. And this is a specialized chainsaw. It's really small. It's only, the blade's only about this long, the bar. And you get going, and you want to cut into the tree just as much as you have to, just enough to slip that nest box in. You kind of see on the left, that's what it looks like after you're done, before you slide the box in. But essentially, with the saw, you're cutting 5 horizontal cuts and 2 vertical cuts. And you kind of see that on the upper middle picture there. And then you take a wood chisel or a crowbar and a hammer, and you pop those little pieces out. And you can see those in the bottom, those 4 or 5 pieces. And then you slide the nest box in, hopefully, without a whole lot of effort. And then you take wood putty and you putty over it to hold it in. You might have to use some wood shims to kind of tighten up the edges. And then you become an artist, and you take brown spray paint and you spray over the wood putty. Try not to spray too much in the hole to match the tree. And then next, you take white spray paint and you actually paint in some fake resin wells so that the bird's attracted to it, and you kind of drizzle them down the tree to make it look like it's flowing. And then lastly, you take your hammer and you turn it around to the claw side, and you actually tap into the tree in a few places to get that resin flowing. And usually the birds move right in. They really appreciate this. This is free housing for them that they didn't have to go through a whole lot of effort to put forth to make it. So they're super appreciative. I want to share this picture. This is me working on an RCW translocation project down in a national forest in South Carolina. This particular population is robust enough that it can lend out pairs to help bolster or even reestablish historical populations on other sites. The birds, as said, they don't move super far on their own, especially not the helpers, those crazy uncles I mentioned. Much training and effort is involved to relocate a federally listed species. I can assure you of that. And no doubt a whole lot of care is put forth ensuring these birds are safely handled and transported to their new home. You have to wear camouflage when you do it. You have to be super stealthy, and you have to sneak up to the nest right at dusk and hopefully get your net over the hole, and then you tap on the tree and they come out. That's kind of the short and skinny of it, and there's a lot more that goes into it. But it's often that you don't capture a bird. So I was really happy that this one worked out. But I will say nothing beats helping to reintroduce or reestablish a historical population through a translocation with a species like this. It's really exciting work. So I've mentioned this a couple of times. A critical part of habitat maintenance and management for RCWs and all fire-dependent species, even including plants that are fire-dependent, including that gentian I showed you earlier, is routine fire in the form of prescribed burns. They can also be referred to as controlled burns. I like prescribed burns because it's very prescriptive, but it is controlled. These are low intensity understory ground fires, on the ground fires, in the Southeast. that, this is something that many species, RCWs included, evolved with. So they evolved with these lightning ignited fires, and these just don't happen on our landscape anymore. When they do, we suppress them, but all these species still need it. It creates the habitat they need that they're dependent on. These are good fires. They have, average flame length of like 2 to 4 feet, maybe 6 feet. They're nothing like wildfires. This is a picture of wildfire, totally different scenario. This fire's in the canopy, a whole lot of black smoke, scary situation, destructive situation. This is occurring when the weather conditions are not optimal. It can lead to many long-term inconveniences and even loss of life for both animals and humans. But prescribed fires are really our best defense against wildfire intensity and severity. And I kind of want to show you this case study slide from South Carolina on how fire or prescribed fires do help mitigate wildfires. So the land parcel on the left-hand side of this picture is scorched. You can see the needle cast. The trees are mostly dead. It had not been regularly burned with prescribed fires. Versus the land on the right had been burned just a few months prior to the wildfire. But the prescribed fires, they took away that intensity and severity. You still got green needles. It really slowed it down. And it just goes to show you that, prescribed burns not only maintain the habitat for these fire dependent species like RCWs, but also truly does lower the intensity and severity of wildfires when they do occur. And honestly, in these fire dependent landscapes, like where RCWs live, it's not a matter of if, but when the next fire does occur. RCWs, I want to talk a little bit about habitat connectivity. They're highly sedentary compared to most other birds. And this is why habitat connectivity is so crucial for this species. Again, adult helper males disperse the shortest distance to nearby territories, often less than a mile away. But some of the juveniles will travel up to 6 miles from their natal territory to establish new ones, as long as it's suitable habitat. Again, this is a resident bird, not a migratory bird, that does not move far. The Virginia population will be important to monitor moving forward due to changing climate, as they are on the leading edge of the range. They're on the northern edge. So it'll be important to watch those. More on habitat connectivity. Because of cooperative breeding systems, the red-cockaded woodpecker populations are usually resistant to environmental and demographic variation, but they're highly sensitive spatial arrangement of their habitat. If groups of RCWs are isolated, dispersal of helpers to neighboring territories can be lost. And when this happens, populations become much less likely to persist through time. Colonization of unoccupied habitats is very slow under natural conditions for this species, because it takes so long to excavate those cavities. And they're not going to be places where they don't have cavities. As forest age and old pines become more abundant on the landscape through proper timber management, rates of natural cavity excavation and colonization can and will increase. These birds are kind of like a primate troop in that they only visit a portion of their territory each day, and then they return to visit the remainder of the territory the next day. So that's kind of neat. For this reason, all these reasons, it's imperative to increase suitable habitat and ensure that there is connectivity. I just want to mention this. Currently, there's a proposed rescission of the definition of harm under the Endangered Species Act. For over 50 years, the definition of take and harm to federally listed species has included their habitat. But this is being challenged right here and now. This would be a step in the wrong direction, in my opinion. if approved, and many species, not just the listed ones, could suffer from habitat loss and fragmentation and degradation. So please stay tuned on that issue as it evolves. Lastly, I just want to say thank you all to everyone for their patience and your time this evening. I know we got off to a little rocky start. Um, I'll gladly take questions with whatever time we have left. My contact is posted here. Please reach out and say hello. Let's go grab a cup of coffee sometime if you're in the area. And just want to leave with go Blue Jays because I'm a baseball fan. But I'll take questions.
Yeah, so there are a couple questions. The first one is, since RCWs mate for life, do you need to capture and relocate couples together?
Um, that's a good question. Sometimes I know I've only been a part of a few translocations, and I know we have taken males and females from different colonies or different clusters. I am not sure if a pair is taken at the same time. That's a great question.
And then there is another question asking if camera use interferes with nesting.
No, I don't believe so. I know it's pretty critical to utilize that tool so that we can keep up with the population and know when they leave and be able to study dispersal rates and sex ratios and all that good stuff. So I don't think biologists, and protocols would allow for such if it was um, at a detriment to the species. But good question.
There's also a question about the resin. So I know you talked about how RCWs are attracted to resin, but do we know why or what they use it for?
It's all about that defense mechanism. So without it, you'd have nest predators climbing that tree, getting in the nest cavity, eating the eggs, and or pushing out the birds. Whether that's a breeding pair, male or female, and or a helper bird. So that resin really keeps the nest predators away as long as, again, the mid story is kept at bay through some sort of, um, you know, um, fire or mechanical means.
Got it. And then also, are bird feeders a problem or a benefit for RCWs?
I don't think you're going to see an RCW at a bird feeder, but if you do, that's pretty awesome because you live close to some very nice habitat. Not to say it couldn't happen because I know they do come to other feeders or other species come to feeders, but none that I'm aware of. I know bird feeders can be a problem for black bears at times, but I'll leave it at that.
And then also, how would the potential change in the Endangered Species Act language affect the future protection of RCWs?
That's a great question. Again, the definition of take has, for 50 years included their habitat as part of it because they have to have their habitat in order to persist. So by taking that away, you run the risk of, either directly impacting the species or, fragmenting their habitat to where these helper birds or female birds can't move out and find new territories. Not to mention just, all those other species that just depend on the maintenance and the management that goes along with RCWs, they would lose out too because if there's something, if they take that habitat, it's sure not going to be managed in the appropriate way.
And then last question I see is, since our longleaf pine forests have been so decimated, do other pine tree species produce adequate resin for the RCW nesting population?
So again, your longleaf pine is going to produce more resin, but I can tell you, working in South Carolina with this species, a pond pine puts out a ton of resin as well. So I do think the other pine species can put out resin. It's just not going to be near as much as the longleaf. Good questions.
Okay, and it looks like there actually are a couple more. So, first, do you know what areas in Virginia have been targeted to enable RCW expansion?
I just know the areas, around the protected lands. I know big woods. There's definitely one I'm forgetting, and it's part of a recovery unit, and I just can't think of it off the top of my head. But Sussex County, and then the City of Chesapeake, just in that general area and buffering those areas. I'm sure there's some efforts to try to add on some land and make sure it's managed appropriately with fire or some sort of mechanical means, so that the birds can disperse. And I know that Virginia has been very successful at growing the population of RCWs in the state.
Awesome. And then circling back to the longleaf pines, have artificial nesting cavities been used successfully in other pine trees as well?
Um, I think they have. I have never installed one in another pond species, but I'm pretty sure they have been. Um, I just have to guess they have to be because there's definitely sites. Looking at that old range map, the RCWs, their historical range would have went north of where the longleaf was historically, so they were definitely using other pond species. So I'm sure people are installing nest inserts in other species as well.
Got it. And then I think actually final question is, are there plans to expand the RCW habitat by deliberate relocation?
Yes, I mean that is definitely being done. It has been done. I have no idea about in Virginia, and it's certainly something I want to look into. Y'all forgive me, I'm just somewhat new to the state and still trying to learn it. But I can report back on that. I'm sure the team in Virginia is conducting translocations as well.
Awesome. I think those are all of the questions.
Thank you.
Trapper, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the presentation and for the grace with the Zoom issues that we had today. And thanks to everyone who attended. We really appreciate you all being able to come. We'll be reaching out to Zoom about the challenges that we had on this particular webinar. But this recording will be going out to you all. And so thank you all for being able to come, and welcome to Trapper, to the team. We're really glad that you're here, and I hope you all have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.